I think one of the other philosophical factors is the fear of dualism in science. Sir John Eccles put forward a dualistic understanding of mind-brain interaction, but he's a heretic, or what knows, he's regarded as a heretic. And so there are huge efforts going on to try and maintain the position of consciousness within the brain. And if one goes to your work, Peter, and which not only in near-death experiences, but also if you push it one stage further to survival of consciousness, or indeed the work of Ian Stevenson on memories of previous lives, then you cannot maintain the position anymore. That consciousness cannot exist independently of brain processes.
It becomes very difficult to do that because the evidence for post-death communications is very strong and very good. And I think what we need is much more science on it now, because you can't get funding for these things. We put this is to deal with near-death experiences and veridical perception, we put a grant into a very famous medical charity in this country. And they said, the science is great, well done. Yeah, you can go into the casualty department, and in people with cardiac arrests, you can find out what they experience, that's fine. But you're not allowed to put your boards up in case they leave their bodies and see the boards, which is what we want you to do. And they said, no, you may not do that part of the experiment. Why? Because they're terrified. They're absolutely terrified that they will have broken one of these rigid taboos of mind and brain being very closely linked, and in fact, as you said, mind created by brain. They wouldn't do it.
But can you actually see that situation changing? Because supposing we had a rerun of the British Association meeting in 2008, I would anticipate a similar reaction. Or do you think there's a way of getting beyond that?
Well, I do. The thing is, you get the similar reaction because the same science journalists are on the Times and so on. And you've got the same people around who put forward these reactionary quotes. And Professor Peter Atkins said, telepathy is nothing but a charlatan's fantasy. When I discussed it with him on BBC Radio 5, he said he hadn't. I asked him if he'd looked at the evidence. He said, of course not, but I'd be very suspicious of it. And you know, he doesn't need to look at the evidence. He knows the truth. And Richard Dawkins is very similar. There are plenty of people who, they're not going to change. But my own view is that what's happening is that there are these very dogmatic people who are called upon by the press because they can be guaranteed to make clear statements that are easy to quote, sound bites.
Yes.
They reinforce the prejudices of some science journalists. But the fact is, most people within the scientific world, in my opinion and experience, are not as dogmatic. What we have is in place a kind of social constraint. Most scientists don't speak out for fear of being thought peculiar, weird or something, but actually the number who really believe this dogmatic materialism is a minority. I think it's a bit
like... a very vociferous one.
Yes, a vociferous one. I think it's a bit like the state of materialism in Russia in the time of Brezhnev. You know, in the Soviet Union there was an official belief in materialism, Marxism.
Yes.
If you didn't pay lip service to it in public, it seriously damaged your career. But how many people really believed it? When the Soviet Union collapsed, I mean, how many totally committed communists are there in Russia today? I mean, not that many, there are some. But I think science is like that, and I think that within scientific institutions there's a large minority, and in many institutions a majority, who don't really buy into this materialist dogma. They pretend to during working hours. But if you talk to people in the evening over a glass of wine, you find much broader and more interesting views. I think what will bring about the change is something more analogous to the gay liberation movement. You know, science is full of closet holists.
Yes.
My idea is that if people come out of the closet, they'll find that in almost every scientific department there are people interested in these questions. They'd then be able to discuss them in the tea room, and instead of keeping quiet and only talking in the evenings to their friends or family about them.
Of course, this was actually one of the rationales of originating the Scientific and Medical Network, so that people could come out of the closet and talk among rational people themselves about these topics which you've been describing as taboo.
Yes, so it was a safe house, really.
Yes.
Where people could do that.
But you see, that's the first stage, is for people to cease feeling they're isolated and that there's no one else you can talk to.
Yes.
But now what happens is that instead of the scientific and medical network just being a group of people voluntarily join and meet other like-minded people, we need this in every science department, as it were, that people would feel this is modelled what can be done when scientists really talk to each other without fear and can explore questions that really interest them. But we need to take this model out. It needs to be something that can actually be done in normal science departments.
No, I think that's a very good point.